So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Please come and join us for the first Breakfast City Debate and for the last one at MIPIM 2018. Our subject this morning is healthy cities, looking at sports, medicine and livability and how these things interact to create a healthy city. And then what part does a healthy city and medicine play in the city development opportunities and the investment opportunities that arise from that. Joining me here on the stage, firstly on the far left, is Sir Richard Leese, the leader of the City of Manchester. Sitting next to Sir Richard, we have Guido Tendole, who's the Director of City Development, the City of Delft, and is representing here the Rotterdam and the Hague metropolitan area. And sitting next to him is Mrs. Sanna Marie Janti, who's the Director of Strategy at the City of Helsinki. Please join me in welcoming our panel, if you will. We're going to begin with you, Sir Richard, and ask you to set the scene a little bit from your perspective, thinking about Manchester, and then we'll gradually develop the conversation. And in a few minutes, I'll ask Richard and colleagues if there's any way you can encourage the crowd that are around the bar either to join us or to move the conversation further away. That would be very helpful because it's very noisy at this end.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. And I'm going to start really base what I'm going to say around health, devolution and integration in Manchester City region, although I'm going to conclude by linking that really to economic activity. So we'll get all of that in hopefully about 5 minutes. And devolution, integration is principally about how we get early intervention, how we get prevention, how we increasingly, when people need either health or care support, they get that within their neighbourhood rather than having to be admitted into hospitals. The real aim is to keep people out of hospital, not least because over 50% of the admissions to hospitals in Greater Manchester are people with chronic conditions, not acute conditions. Quite often a number of those very predictable in many ways and should be treatable without having to be admitted to hospital. Two practical examples of how we're doing some of that work. One of the big causes of the single biggest cause of premature death in Greater Manchester is still smoking, sadly. And one of the things that hospitals are now doing, so this is how hospitals are engaged in the process in Manchester, is if anybody is admitted to hospital, they are now asked if they smoke. That didn't used to happen. They're now asked if they smoke, and if they say they do smoke, it is now treated as part of their illness. It's an addiction, and part of what they will receive in hospital is an offer of treatment in order to deal with something that is really an enormous killer. A related thing is around lung checks. Manchester, particularly in our more deprived areas, one of the issues around premature death is that people present with symptoms very, very late. So for people with lung cancer, an absolute killer. People who present to doctors in large parts of Manchester, their cancer is already at stage 4 when they present. Basically, it is untreatable. By taking lung checks out into supermarket car parks, rather than expecting people to come into clinics, in a trial in North Manchester, basically a mobile clinic outside the Harpay Asda, something like, it's double figures, something like 20-odd people diagnosed with lung cancer, but nearly all of them at stage 2 rather than stage 4, basically at a stage where treatment could be offered with a very, very high chance of people going into remission. A lot of this requires, and it underpins this, people have to take responsibility for their own health. Early intervention prevention is people taking responsibility for their own health. That is around lifestyle. I've mentioned smoking. Clearly, a big part of taking responsibility is exercise. I don't know how many studies we need to demonstrate that regular exercise is good for you. It extends your life. It reduces the risk of all sorts of things. I think it's well demonstrated. And there's a real connection with sport. Sport is a way that you can both get exercise and motivate to exercise. So we do have programs like the Manchester Active program, which is about certainly promoting exercise, but also making it simpler and being able to use a whole range of facilities we have in the city to get people being fitter. And this underpins what I think the approach we take increasingly across Greater Manchester, what we describe as the asset-based approach, is that rather than the old way of basically telling people what's wrong with them, you start having a conversation with them. You find out more about them, about their life, other things are going on. And if you do that, you often find that the people you're having the conversation with have a far better idea of what's going to help them than the professionals will do. So now, I'm going to link this into the economy, and it links into the economy, I think, in a number of ways. I'm going to pick four very, very quickly. First of all, employment. There are 170,000 people employed in health and social care in Greater Manchester. It is, by some way, the biggest single employment sector within Greater Manchester. I don't think we often recognise that significance. So just simply from the people it employs, the economic significance is absolutely enormous. There is a property aspect to it as well. I said we're developing new neighbourhood facilities. We want more people to be supported in their own communities, in their own homes. And that's based in the City of Manchester on 12 neighbourhood hubs. In parts of the city, that's using existing facilities. But if you want a facility that includes general practitioners, a whole range of specialist nurses and so on, in some areas we're going to be constructing new neighbourhood hubs. The most example that's under construction now is the Gorton neighbourhood, where there is an ability to design and build new facilities that are based around a new approach to healthcare. Third area is Health Innovation Manchester. Something I think you're going to be talking about in a Helsinki context. We're looking for new solutions to health problems. Some of those new solutions, not necessarily drugs, are things that ultimately that can be monetised. They can be sold to other parts of the country, other parts of the world. And Health Innovation Manchester, it's a partnership between local authorities, between health providers and health research in about being able to do precisely that. And the last thing to talk about is that, particularly again in deprived areas, the people who aren't in work, over 90% of them, it's because they have a health condition. Some of them have a health condition because they're not in work. There is a connection between the two. And one of the things we're doing is squaring that circle about making sure that we have a health and work stream, which is about supporting people of staying in work, but for people out of work, supporting them back into work.
So, Richard, thank you very much indeed. There's lots to chew on there and a lot that we can develop in the discussion. But you made the point, really, about the devolution of health and the localisation of health and how that's enabling you to develop and approach healthy lifestyles much more seriously. And then you made these four key points about employment, facilities in the local neighbourhoods, health innovation, and then this dilemma between unemployment and poor health and how those two things relate. So much to discuss there when we come back to the conversation. Let's go immediately to the city of Delft in the Hague-Rotterdam metropolitan area and welcome Guido $10 to give us his reflections.
Thanks to you. I'm Guido $10. I'm working at the city of Delft. I'm a director for urban development. So I'm responsible for the urban development strategy, but when you're responsible for that for the city of Delft, you have to do that and cooperate with your greater cities in the region, and that's Rotterdam and The Hague. So together in this region, we have 2.5 million inhabitants, and that's, I think, comparable to the greater Manchester region. Looking to the perspective of a healthy area, I think first we have to recognize that this metropolitan region in our city is the most dense in the Netherlands, and I think almost the most dense in Europe as well, because we are in a delta area. A lot of people also work, and universities and things are in this part of the Netherlands. We see a very strong growth potential over there. We do have 2.5 million inhabitants, but we expect more than 400,000-500,000 people coming to the region. That is from inland mobility, but also from outland, I think, when it comes to migration as well. So looking to that, and then from a city development perspective, you do see several challenges we had. One thing is, of course, the health side. Comparable to the Manchester region, in the Netherlands, health is also delocalized. So when it comes to awareness raising, to campaigns, to facilities to stimulate cooperation between institutions, it is the responsibility of cities to do so and to stimulate. So one thing we do already, when it comes to smoking, to behave your personal behaving, we have broad programs to stimulate that. One example is that in Delft, 5 years ago, we started the e-health academy, a Delft e-health academy, in which the big university, there is a big technical university in Delft, world leading when it comes to healthcare solutions, also when it is to your personal lifestyle. And what we do is working with education institutes, with innovation, with new companies also, but with the inhabitants of your city yourself, to do programs as well. And I think it's a great success as a sort of a community you create in how you could stimulate that. So this is one challenge we had. Second challenge is everything which comes to mobility. When you're such a dense area and there's a growth potential as well, and it's becoming more and more dense, there are a lot of traffic jams coming from the one side, from the Rotterdam to The Hague, to the other one. You can easily travel 1 hour by car for 30 kilometers. So that means that the car is not anymore the solutions. So we really start to stimulate biking, which, you know, in the Netherlands is a very popular form of transport. But biking also for using as a way of commuting from work to home. People now travel, and particularly with electric bikes, more than 20k to the work. So we are definitely stimulating a lot, also financially, by making fast-track bike trails. So that on distances from Rotterdam to The Hague, which is 20k, so you can drive very fast with your electric bike or with your racing bike. So that is good for your health, good for your stimulation, but also good for preventing more traffic jam and things like that. The third thing I think we have to highlight it when it comes to public space. We do see when you're so dense that a lot of we do have a lot of buildings and industries and work locations, and we do have sport complexes. But sport complexes are now part of communities themselves, the football clubs, the hockey clubs, but they are in ownership of the city, but they are privatized by small communities. But there are a lot of time in the week, a lot of hours, they are empty. So what we do is stimulate more sharing of these facilities. Also in your public space, you do see much more people moving, also when they're working, take an hour and running to the park. So we have a very broad program in how your public space stimulates and facilitates your personal lifestyle. So these are 3 things which are important for us.
Great, Guido, thank you very much indeed. So you talked about the density of Delft and the density of the Rotterdam, The Hague metropolitan area, and you said obviously there's this issue about the delocalization of services. How do you really get people to live healthy lifestyles? You went on to talk about mobility. I mean, I'm fascinated by whether a 20-kilometer ride on an e-bike, how good is that really for your health if you've got an electric engine pushing you along? But we'll come back.
You still have to move.
You still have to pedal as well.
To pedal.
And then the third thing you talked about was the kind of the sports facilities and how you try to optimize their uses through sharing platforms and other things. So very interesting, and we'll come back to this in the discussion. Let's go immediately to Sanna Marie. Welcome to you you as well. Thank you for joining us from the city of Helsinki. Give us the reflection from your city.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here. I'm the still brand new Director of Strategic Initiatives with the City of Helsinki. We have a new mayor. He's been at the office for 9 months, and we have a brand new city strategy. And one of the key issues in the strategy is that we want to be the most functional city in the world. Well, functionality is not very sexy. It sounds, slightly boring and not maybe that desirable. But it's what we are good at. Now, what we really need to develop is to bring that functionality and that dialogue with the community. And that creates the best everyday life, in our opinion. It's not about us trying to create what we know is good for the people. It's about us trying to create a condition where people are able to have an impact and empowerment in their own communities and the way they lead their lives. Finns are not very good at bragging. So I don't have to brag when I tell you that the World Economic Forum just released the World Happiness Report yesterday. And apparently Finland is the happiest place in the world to live. We were runner-up for Norway for years and years, and now we're #1, so I guess we're doing something right. Thank you. However, we realize that happiness and health don't always go hand in hand. People can be very happy but not very healthy, and vice versa. So we have to, take strategic measures in order to make a better everyday life, including people being happy and being healthy. Now, one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to recognize resources that are previously untapped. And one of the things is, incredibly enough, the weather and the outdoors in Helsinki. A lot of people don't think Finland as the optimal, it looks like this pretty much, not the optimal place to have a very outdoorsy lifestyle. But currently we're looking at things that we could do and develop in order to make people interact with their surroundings more. We have great resources in Archipelago. We have a beautiful seashore, great forests very close to the city. You can take a bus for 25 minutes. You're in the middle of the forest from central Helsinki. There's a lot of things you can do outdoors. And it's something that people kind of take for granted, and we haven't been really developing that. But I think in the future, it's going to be something that people are much more going to be tapped into. Another thing is, of course, collaboration between the city, the university, the local communities, and the private sector. Finland is a very big hub for startups, and we currently develop a lot of collaboration with startups who specifically work in health, medicine, bioresearch, etc. We are not the largest city in the world, as you know. We have to kind of tap into every resource we have. And one of the things that has really been a good platform for international collaboration is the startups and the work that they're doing. That allows us to learn from the best practices abroad and in different parts of the globe, but also act as a test bed for things that people want to develop together. Because Helsinki is relatively small, we're able to do things and test things in a much more effective way than maybe larger cities. The third thing is that in order to make the best everyday life, it needs to be functional in a way that people experience in their everyday life. So for example, the fact that schools still offer sports every week for children. It's mandatory. They learn about different kinds of sports. They learn about doing things in groups, and they learn about healthy lifestyle. Basic healthcare is still free. We're developing that much more in sync with what you're doing in Manchester, making it a bit more accessible, a bit more community-based, and kind of talking to people about what they need and what they want from the city and not vice versa. And providing those best possible basic services gives people the opportunity to have a healthy lifestyle and then maybe upgrade from that basic level into something that they feel connected to. So in order to learn what people really want and need and how they will be happier and healthier, you really kind of have to go into the community and see what they want instead of us trying to give them something that we perceive as good.
Great. Sanna Marie, thank you very much indeed. So 3 big issues there. How to make the highly functional city also a city where you're able to use underutilized resources to promote health, livability, well-being. You said that the connection between innovation and collaboration, and you made the point that your very dense startup scene is also a means for you to learn lessons about healthy living. And then thirdly, you talked about healthy lifestyles and the importance of really engaging with the community at grassroots level to understand how they want to be healthy rather than just telling them how to be healthy. Seems to me that that's really interesting. Let's pick up this theme, if we may, and have a bit of a conversation, firstly, about what you think has really worked in engaging the population on the issue of healthy lifestyles and what you learn when you do that. Sir Richard, you began by talking about the devolution of healthcare in Manchester. I imagine that you learned a lot from all of the discussions that happened with the community around that. What did you discover worked in terms of engagement, but also in terms of learning what people really want?
I think the big learning has come from developing the asset-based approach, and how we would describe that is that we start to have a different conversation with people, a different discussion. So the real learning is that to a certain extent all the promotional programs we do, although they do have some impact, it's really when we get down to talking to people and finding out, and I think a lot of us are saying this, is really what's important to people, what's going to make a difference to their life, and being able to tailor solutions around those things that people tell us, rather than going in with a fixed menu of, well, if you've got this condition, this is the solution. So it's really, we have to have that different discussion, that different conversation.
Guido, what about in Delft and in the metropolitan area more broadly? How do you make the conversation real for people?
I think very important is that we have two levels when it comes to awareness raising and health. It's much more the national government in the Netherlands who do have a lot of campaigns when it comes to moving to smoking and these kind of things. The kind of conversation we organize them, of course, in the local level, but they do see that the enthusiasm will be the greatest when it's related to making combinations of sports and education, for example.
Yeah.
We have a lot of good experiences in stimulating after-school programs for children when sports clubs and others will together organize good activities in which youngsters, in this case, will realize what it is to have a good personal lifestyle. The interesting other thing, and that's I think is the one thing we still have to challenge us about, is that much more people, elder people, will live in the city.
Yeah.
The aging of population, of course, in a city is also with us. So the way of how people want to become old in the city and what they need for their personal lifestyle is a much more complicated issue. We thought always that people getting old and wants to be old in a green area.
In the countryside.
Yeah, in the countryside. So they want to see the forest and the greens and the bees. Yeah. But that's not the case anymore for the current. A lot of people wants to live also in the city center, to see youngsters, to see the dynamic, to not be alone. We have a very broad national campaign to stimulate that older people live as long as possibly in their own home. But then you need homes who are suitable for that, and you need a city area which gives them a sort of a social community feeling, and not that they are alone in the city.
So is elderly housing and specific kinds of retirement living, is this now emerging as a new residential format?
Yes, that is one of the booming topics about how we create and also develop cities. So now for Delft, for example, we have a new complete inner city around the station, because we had the tunnel now of our railway. There we create a complete new town next to the old town. Yeah. And one of the discussion is, if we do nothing, then the real estates and the big developers will build houses, apartments for students, hotels and things like that. But then there will be no homes for the elderly. So we're now discussing with our local institutions how we also develop and create this atmosphere that it's very good to be and to live there, becoming old over there and what they need also in the public space for community, that people meet up others, youngsters for example, and making interesting combinations. So these are really interesting things now.
So just before you come in, Sanna Marie, so Richard, is there an equivalent conversation in Manchester about as people age and live longer, life expectancy increases, more people want to live in the city centre in old age?
I think that's the case, although I think in terms of Europe at the moment, Manchester is a little bit of an oddity because as a city we're getting younger rather than getting older. Actually, in the last 2 census period, although our population went up by, I think, 19% over that 10-year period, the number of people over 65 went down in that period of time. What is the case, though, that a lot of, yes, they do want an active lifestyle. They do want to be where there is activity going on. But at the same time, of course, with it, not just in the older population, that there are people who maybe 20 years ago would have died at 20 who are now living to 50. Yeah. There are people with quite severe conditions that are living a lot longer as well. And we need to think about how we manage that without having to move people around institutions all the time. So one of the things we're developing is what we describe as extra care housing. Yeah. It's probably not a bad name really because actually it's housing. Yeah. We, for example, in Wythenshawe, a complex of apartments, it's entirely occupied by older people. Most of them are fit and healthy, but if they do have care needs, we're able to provide them within that complex. And there is going to be more of that sort of accommodation being developed. So it also deals with the loneliness issue as well. It gives companionship and a whole range of other things. And in many cases, these are people who are moving into the apartments out of family housing that they no longer need, which is freeing it up for families as well. So there are lots and lots of pluses out of taking that approach. We're probably going to build another at least 200 this year, and we're going to probably have to replicate that for 4 or 5 years. But say the basis is it's just a home. It's a home where there are other facilities and support available.
Fantastic. So this might be a topic you want to pick up in a minute when we open it up for discussion about the provision of specific kinds of housing types and models for people at different stages in their life cycle and how that interfaces with the health system. So the housing health interface, very interesting. But Sanna Marie, come back to the first question about how do you engage at the street level, the neighbourhood level with your community, and what do you learn from that interchange? And then please also comment on this issue of ageing and elderly.
I'm going to take an example from the food world because food is a very important part of healthy lifestyle and it's an important part of happy living. A few years back, it's very, very difficult to create a restaurant in Helsinki. We have all kinds of rules and regulations and tests you have to take, and it's just a very complicated process. And people got fed up and tired by the fact that they were not able to create these like pop-up restaurants or these, joint festivals where they could eat, and it was very difficult, and the authorities from the city side were not very forthcoming with any kind of relaxation of rules and regulations. So basically what happened is the community decided that, okay, the city is very slow decision maker. So if we just do this really, really quickly, they don't really catch up, and we can do our food festival, and then they can, fine us later. So what happened was they created something called the Restaurant Day. Now it happens 4 times a year. Everyone who wants to can create a restaurant wherever they want to, at their home, in a park, at a metro station. Some people have a little pop-up restaurant in their living room and they kind of hand out hot dogs from their windows. And people pay a little money for the food and come together and eat. And it's outdoors even during the winter time. Yeah. And the first time around, the city was like, whoa, what happened? They just kind of created all these illegal restaurants and we couldn't do anything about it. And then obviously after that, it was a very loved occasion and people were excited about it. And then we were like, well, fine, okay, let's do this. So I think
Sanna Marie, did you open a restaurant on that day?
I actually have.
And what did you serve?
This is a funny story. I used to live in North Carolina, so chili is a very southern food, which I love very much.
Chili con carne.
Yeah, but sin carne in this occasion.
Okay, chili con vegan.
Yeah, something like that.
Chili con vegan.
So I created this southern pop-up restaurant called Hillbilly Haystack, and we offered chili and southern rap music.
Wow.
It was very popular.
Yeah. And when are you doing it again in case we want to come?
I'm thinking about it. Maybe at the City Hall.
Okay.
That would be exciting.
Very
but
good.
I think the lesson learned from this is that you have to realize that as a city, you might be the biggest problem. It could be that you are the problem.
Well, the regulation and the rigidity that you were describing,
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the illegal restaurant in the mayor's office.
You're invited officially.
Great, and now tell us a little bit about the increasing life expectancy, the aging population. How does that play out in Helsinki?
I think we all share the same concern. I mean, people are getting older. We are a city where the population is getting older. It's a big structural question in Finland as a whole, but also in Helsinki. You know, the ability for people to stay at home for as long as they want to and can is one of the priorities of the new strategy. We really want to support people's independence, their ability to stay at home, their ability to interact with their community, even if they're not very mobile. So the focus really is on providing services for people at their homes. And this has been a policy for years and years now, and it's going really well. One of the kind of downsides there might be that people get isolated in their homes. So one of the big questions going forward is how do you provide services so that people are able to stay at home, but at the same time they're still part of the community, they're able to be active, and finding that balance for people, that's tricky.
And does part of that involve the kind of property solutions that Sir Richard was describing and Guido was beginning to describe? Do you have a specific sector of elderly housing, as it were?
It's certainly developing. It's developing. I mean, city has the need for that, but also private companies have recognized that as a new way forward. I think there's a lot of exploration around that area. One of particular favorite of mine is that elderly people move into communes with younger people.
Yeah.
There is a problem with small housing in Helsinki. Students have very hard time finding housing. Small apartments are scarce in the central Helsinki. So there's this trend that older people and younger people move together to communes so that they are able to support each other. And I think that's a very interesting way going forward, that you look at the community as a whole and recognize that not everyone wants to be with people their own age, or not everyone wants to be with exactly the same people as everyone else. So bringing people in who have same needs is one way forward, I think.
Very helpful. We're going to open it up for questions and conversations from you. There's only one rule. Now, if you're entering the conversation, you have to say, if you were opening a pop-up restaurant for a day, what would be the food that you would serve? I'll start by saying I'm definitely going to cook chicken jalfrezi. So anyone who likes really spicy chicken, come to my pop-up restaurant. That'll be the place to do it. We're talking about healthy cities. We're talking about sport, medicine, livability, how they interact with the city and the built environment. And the floor's open for people who want to come into the conversation. If you do, raise your hand and we'll bring you straight in. There's two people there, so start with the lady at the back. Yes, please.
How have you made sure that the ageing population aren't medicalised, so that everything isn't seen through a medical lens? I'd be really interested on your thoughts.
Great, very good question. So how do you make sure that it's not just a medicalisation process and it's actually about people living fully rather than simply being treated?
In terms of food, it will be Scouse, I'm afraid, so kind of get the learn.
You'd be what?
My restaurant will be Scouse.
Scouse, yeah. So what would that involve, actually?
Just any sort of vegetables or a thrown pot and served to everybody. My question really is about how do you see the city encouraging the development of intergenerational communities? Because I have a concern that the City of Manchester and other cities around the UK are not developing those or seeing the advantages of it. Yeah. Some great lessons from Scandinavia. I'd just be interested to see or hear if there are thoughts about how those could be developed in Manchester.
Great, thank you very much. So Sanna Marie was talking about that. By the way, we need to know about your restaurant. So Richard will bring the microphone back to you. But Sanna Marie, the question is about the intergenerational communities, just as you were describing. How do you get people across the age range living together? What have you learned about that? And maybe, Guido, you have lessons as well as Sir Richard's reflections. What would your restaurant be?
I'm afraid it's going to have to be a cheese and onion pie restaurant.
Cheese and onion?
Pie.
Cheese and onion pie. Very nice. Okay. Who else wants to come into the conversation? We're getting a bit shy now. I can see that. But some of you do want to tell us what you would cook. I know that. So, anybody else waiting to come in? The microphone will come down.
Hiya. My food will be jambalaya.
Jambalaya.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Creole. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask them about the mobility, and if you can, guys from Delft and Helsinki, can say a little bit more about sort of what you do to get people moving around the city in terms of walking, cycling, etc., and sort of how that's impacted on health budgets and whatnot.
Yeah, so is there any evidence about how these active transport modes are affecting people's health? So we've got 3 questions. One is about really developing proper policies for ageing populations and thinking about them more generally and how they fit into the city. The second one was about any observations about building intergenerational communities. And then the third one about the health impacts of active transport. So, Sanna Marie, why don't you start, and then Guido, and then Sir Richard.
Okay, let me touch on the transportation question, because we had a very interesting test in Helsinki a few years back about transportation. The issue, of course, is that not everyone is as mobile as everyone else, and it's difficult for some people to use public transportation. It might be difficult for them to get to the bus stop or the metro station, and they kind of get stranded at their homes. So we created something called Kutsu Plus, which is basically a bus for hire. So what you do is you have these little minibuses, and you can invite that bus to come to your door, to your home, to your doorstep. And it usually takes different kinds of routes, and they kind of optimize the route based on this algorithm on an app. And then basically you just step out of your home or office or wherever you are, and it takes about a few minutes, and then the bus will come. And it will take a different route every time, depending on where it needs to pick up other people. But basically, it's a very effective, easy-to-use transportation method for people who might be otherwise disadvantaged in using transportation like that. It's charming because it kind of goes back to the old times where the bus drivers would kind of pick up you from your home or take a detour for your children. And we hadn't had that for years because everything is obviously so planned and regulated now. But it kind of went back to that idea that you're able to use it as you need and make it your own. We ended that test period because it was actually very, very expensive. And that kind of goes back to how much are the cities willing and able to develop these kinds of services that have no economic basis, but would allow people to be a more mobile and active lifestyle.
Great, okay. And did you want to pick up the point you were making about intergenerational communities? So the question is really, what have you learned from that experience about how to make that work? How do you get younger and older people living in the same place?
Like I said, part of it is recognizing a joint need.
Yeah.
The joint need might not be, I want to live with older people. It's, I need to live in a small apartment in central Helsinki.
Yeah.
And that's impossible, so I'm going to build a community. Another thing is that there's a lot of movement from other parts of Finland to Helsinki for jobs and for university education or other education. And people in other parts where they live rural, they're kind of used to having a different kind of home environment maybe than in the city. People have big families, and they have big families around them that help them and support them. They move into the city, and they feel lonely, and they don't have that generational connection anymore that they used to share in their homes. So it feels natural for a lot of people to search and go into a community like that supports kind of their sense of home in a way. We are currently, collecting data from these experiences and then trying to find out new ways to encourage this type of movement and coming together.
Great. Okay, thank you. Guido, some reflections from you on these questions?
Maybe on 2 things. This commuting of the different age groups. One thing we're experimenting now with the developers of new property is a concept like Friends concepts. In which, looking to our tradition, we are quite individually when it comes to housing. So, but when it's now there are becoming more and more need for community housing. So sharing your kitchen together and making your pop-up meal every day differently. But then with separate rooms. Normally that were institutions, but what we are now seeing is that Friends concept of 4 or 5 people who are lonely, they have lost their spouse or anything else.
And this is genuinely, we heard a lot about this, but it's genuinely growing in Delft and in your metropolitan area.
There are 2 or 3 developers who come to us with these kind of concepts, and we're now negotiating with them how it could fit into your area. But then you do have a lot of challenges as well, because people are moving, so it's temporarily. So what is it financially interesting? So what are the constructs that comes with us, and also with your spatial planning and your rules and regulations. Mm-hmm. And in this concept, you do see we are a university city as well. So 1/5 of the inhabitants are students as well. So this commuting, also by placing those friends concept and community very close to student housing, you create also in your public space and the way how you're sharing facilities interaction. So that's one of the advantages Delft has with a lot of students coming home. That is differently with the other big cities where you definitely have to give more regulation as well, so to commute them. So that's one thing. So we're experimenting with that, but we are very far in the beginning. So community housing is not very largely defined. Secondly, when it comes to transport, one thing we do see is that one of the obstacles of being alone in a city is the way the public space, the roads, the way you move from your house to the supermarket and back, what you come and see on your way. So these are a lot of obstacles then. So what we have done, for example, also one of our part of initiatives with the eHealth Academy is to make an inventarization of how your public space in Delft is being designed and developed. And is it, for example, fit for people who have brain problems? So dementia, I think it's called.
Dementia.
Yeah. And we did a sort of a check about how the public space should be developed better and more. So then there's the different steps. You need points in your public space which are recognizable for people. So they know, oh, I now have to go to the left and to the right. The interesting thing, you have challenges as well, because in this inventarization, we see that green is not very, in your public space, is very good for dementia problems. So do you have a new conflict? Yeah. Because when it comes to climate and others, we need more green into the cities. Yeah. And this green dimension is very badly for those groups and people. So we have to fit and struggle a lot with things we could improve.
So that's a very interesting point, isn't it, about the relationship between mental health and public space, and how you design public space in such a way that it supports people with mental health challenges to live full and active lives. But then you're saying actually there's a kind of friction in all of that with your greening of the city agenda, and those two things haven't yet figured out how they work together. So Richard, will you pick this up, thinking about Manchester and these issues?
Yeah, I'll also pick up my restaurant's going to be roast lamb, roast dinner.
Oh, nice.
And bread and butter pudding, which is not very healthy, but we're only doing it 4 days a year.
That's right.
And I will use wholemeal bread in the bread and butter pudding as well. So it's
who's coming to Sir Richard's restaurant?
I'll start with the question that Pam asked, really, about medicalisation, because actually clearly we have to do the opposite. We have to socialise medicine rather than get everything into a clinical model. And we are seeing increasingly, continuing the earlier conversation, the use of social prescriptions. So people with mental health problems or people with dementia, you'll, for example, see art as being prescribed rather than drugs or anything else. And we're seeing far more of that social prescription. I think the way we have to approach it is to, first of all, recognise that there is an issue there and there is a danger there. So in Manchester, for the local care organisation, one of the things I've done as chair of our Health and Wellbeing Board is to say to the chief executive, what are you doing in terms of management training, staff development, your programmes to make sure that we do have the sort of approach we want. We're talking I think over 25% of health and social care professionals in the UK are trained in Manchester. So we're talking to the providers about what are you doing in initial training to make sure people are trained for a new model of working. Because if you get it into initial training, then it's kind of for life there. So, but we've got to be very conscious about it, and we've got to work on that. Similarly, on intergenerational stuff, and Manchester City, we have an elected member who's our intergenerational champion, but I think I'm going to start in another place, really, is that we were one of the first 10 cities in the world to be recognised by the World Health Organization as an age-friendly city. And it starts off particularly with older people, of seeing older people as an asset rather than a problem, that the people have got something to contribute, including to contribute to younger people, and that older people should be in control of that. Again, this is not providing service too. So our age-friendly steering group say what we should be doing around making ourselves a more age-friendly city rather than people sat in the town hall making those decisions. So very conscious approach about the sort of city we want to create and what the position of older people is within that city. But the starting point for anybody in the city at all is that everybody's got something to give, and our starting point is got to be from around that. Just a little bit on how you encourage active lifestyles. I'll just give one real example, which partially relates to some of the stuff that Chris Boardman would have been talking about yesterday. This will be seen particularly for Delft, something like, right, you only just got round to doing this. This is to do with cycling. There is a difference. I cycle regularly, but where I live, we've got hills. Delft hasn't got hills, so it's why you need an electric bike in Holland is utterly beyond me, because it's all flat. I could do with it.
But you do have wind.
I could
do have wind.
Yeah, well, yeah, you've got wind. Okay, but I'm a regular cyclist. I don't mind going on our roads. A lot of people who aren't regular cyclists, younger people, don't like going on the roads where they're mixing with other traffic. A very early example of where we've put in a segregated cycle lane on one of the major routes coming into the city centre, and in a relatively short period of time, i.e. months rather than a long period, the number of people cycling on that route doubled. And it's not just the middle-aged men in Leica anymore, which is the archetypal. I have to be very careful, because our head of city centre regeneration, who isn't a middle-aged man in Leica, actually commutes by bike every day. But no, we now do have more families cycling, people who are not confident cyclists using the bikes because they feel safe. And that's one of the ways that you encourage more people to be active. You make it easy, you make it safe for people, and if you do that, you'll get more people doing it.
Thank you very much, Sir Richard. Guido, we didn't hear from you what your restaurant would be, by the way.
Yeah, my restaurant would be of a good Italian pizza.
Good Italian pizza.
Handmade, yeah.
Sounds good. So a final question to kind of draw this together. I'd like you to reflect on some of those big land uses: sports stadia, hospitals, universities, maybe even airports, other big land uses. How do you recruit and get them more involved in the healthy lifestyle of the citizens? Any examples from your cities? Perhaps, Guido, you'd begin, and then Sanna Marie, and then Sir Richard to finish off.
Yeah, one of the issues we have, of course, very intense contact with the University of Delft, which is 1/5 of the surface of our city.
Yeah.
One thing, which this university is 24,000 students.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of area on their spot that with relates to sport. So one thing we do now, and the last years, we see a good initiatives about sharing those facilities with other sports clubs and with other people living in Delft. And that's good also for knowing each other, because there are other parts of the city where social housing is very large, with people with very low income, and they never in their life will come to a campus area. No. So what we do see is a lot of initiatives about making use of those facilities as well. It's good for their lifestyle, but secondly, it's also good about building a community in your city, because there is more interaction between the campus people and the researchers with people in the social sector and with low incomes who never will be in contact or other way around. Yeah. So that's one of the things we do. Some programs are there, but I think it's not intense enough, because you always have the question of property and responsibility.
Yes.
That makes it sometimes difficult about how your sharing concepts will work out in the end. and what you do with your maintenance and these kind of things. So
Sure.
we definitely want to stimulate it more.
So more to do in that space.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sharing.
Yeah. Sanna Marie, in Helsinki, how do you get these larger land uses, these bigger institutions to contribute to the health of the city?
Well, currently we're developing a very large children's hospital. We're creating a new stadium. We have major development projects going on. And I think we are very good at taking care of the art perspective in these new developments. There is a very big drive towards creating more public art and creating art and art experiences to these buildings. We're also very good at creating children's playgrounds around these areas, greenery, and places that people can enjoy. But we are not very good at taking into consideration health issues as such. I was recently in New York, and their Department of Design and Construction or something like this, they actually have a manual of how to create public spaces in a way that it promotes healthy lifestyle and promotes mobility, which I think is an amazing way forward, but I think we still have a lot to learn in that aspect.
Okay, thank you. Sir Richard?
Well, I'm going to talk about some bits of our major sports infrastructure. Not surprisingly, I'm going to talk about the Etihad.
Manchester City
Manchester
Football
City.
Club.
I'm going to talk a little bit about, just a word about cycling as well, because clearly we are pretty much the... I think if our cycling team was a country, I think it's Beijing, they would have come about 8th in the medal table alone. So cycling is track cycling is a big activity in Manchester. But City Football Club, actually, the Etihad Stadium, it's owned by the City Council. Part of the lease conditions is that it's open for community use on a regular basis. But next door, the City Football Academy, which is not owned by the City Council, is owned entirely by the football club, where, as well as the stadium for the women's team and the elite training squad, they have their first team training facilities, they have their elite training development squad training facilities, they have their academy training facilities, and there are community sports pitches there as well. It's built in to the facilities that the community are going to be part of it. Similarly, if you just go across the road to the National Cycling Centre, you will have school children using on a regular basis. There's a problem, and the place is fully booked all the time, so getting space in there is really, really difficult. If you go into the BMX centre, which is part of that, at times you're going to see toddlers in there on the BMX. They're not on bikes by then, by the way. They're on sort of scooter things, but getting young children in really, really early, being able to use the facilities. And again, it's getting a booking is quite hard work now. But in terms of going around that track, even old people like me can, if you book in, get the chance to ride around it and use those facilities. But you have to build it in. It's got to be part of the plan. And we do that when we host national, international sporting events in the city. It's always built into the business plan. Club development and coaching has got to be part of it, not just the elite event itself.
Great. Sir Richard, thank you very much indeed. Thank you to all of you. What we're going to do is to bring this to a close. We've been talking about healthy cities, sports, medicine, livability, how they come together. What we're going to do first is that myself and the other panellists are going to give a round of applause to the audience for showing up on such a wet and windy morning. So thank you very much, audience. And now I'm going to invite you to join me in thanking Sir Richard Lees, Guido Tendola, and Sanna Marie Janti from Helsinki. Thank you very much indeed to our panel.